Hey folks, one of the sectors that is super important for South African economy that we don't typically talk about, except when there are problems like last week, is the agricultural sector. And we thought, you know what, why don't we start a regular segment, which we can call it AgriView with me, Wandile. And in this segment, we can discuss a number of themes. You can even suggest some of the themes that you want to explore with us, or some of the themes that are useful not only for the moment, but for the long term in understanding what has really been happening in this farming economy of South Africa. And certainly this past week, there were a number of those themes. It started with a conversation in the White House. And of course, we have to reflect on how this sector has been 30 years into democracy. And one of the things that I want to talk about, which we did not discuss much, is that the Deputy President was in Paris last week, or in France. What was he doing there? Is it really important for the agricultural sector? Is one of the things that I think it's important to talk about. And I have been one of the people who have been super optimistic about how this sector will perform in 2025. Last year, it was a very challenging year for the agricultural sector in South Africa. And that's another theme that I want to explore, at least in this opening segment of this conversation that I hope we will have it regularly over the coming weeks or so. Now, starting first with the US. Is the US important for the South African agricultural sector? What is it that we want from the US? And I would say there you have to think about it almost in two themes. One, there's an aspect around investment and how many US firms operate in the South African economy in general, but also in the agricultural sector. Especially for us in agribusiness, the machinery suppliers, some of the input suppliers, those are the US companies that have invested in South Africa. And I think they are key to this journey and growth and the progress that we've been talking about as South Africa's agriculture. The second aspect is, of course, the issue of trade. Now, you know, in South Africa, our agricultural sector is what we call export-oriented. We send almost half of our products in value terms to the world market. And yes, I know some of the people on X have said, oh, you guys are sending all of these things to the exports and you are leaving the domestic consumers hungry. That's why we have this poverty. And I mean, look, poverty in South Africa is a serious issue. We have millions of South Africans that go to bed without sufficient nutrition. But let's be clear on one thing. The difficulties we face are not necessarily an agricultural aspect, but more of an income poverty. It's about how do we empower households so that they can have as many jobs as possible, and also any other intervention that we can put to improve the household income and their buying power. So it's what we call the poverty income. The food is available and it's nutritious. Also, it's not that super expensive relative to what you see in the world. But the reality is that if you don't have the income, it doesn't necessarily matter where the price is. So that's an important context when we are thinking about the exports. What South Africa sends to the world is really the surplus on all of the products after having considered what is typically the demand of the domestic market. Now, on those exports, a year, they typically valued at over $13 billion. But last year, it was a very excellent year for the sector in exports terms. We exported in 2024 a record $13.7 billion US. These exports are varied into a number of regions. The African continent is almost half of that. The EU, 19%. The Middle East with Asia, also a significant region, around about 24% or so of South Africa's agricultural export. Now, the US, which I said is important, it's about 4% of South Africa's agriculture exports. And now I know there are some of you who say, why are we sweating so much? What are these farmers talking about when it's only 4%? Can't we quickly take this to China or elsewhere? And I think that's an important consideration to think about. But the reality is that that 4% is quite big. It's almost $500 million US. Think about that, not rands. Even the $500 million rands is a lot of money, by the way. But this is $500 million US. But importantly, it's concentrated in certain regions. You have to think about citrus industry, the table grapes, wine, nuts, ostrich leathers. You see those boots that they wear in Texas and the others? There's some of our ostrich leather, by the way, that is there. So Texas folks, think about that. We helped in producing those nice outfits that you have there. But with all seriousness, folks, this is an important market for South Africa for certain commodities. And I think it's important then that as South Africa, we continue to trade with the US. So for the agricultural sector, that visit was important for that particular matter, investments, as well as extending trade to the US. We can think about diversification to other regions. But let's be honest here, diversification takes time. You're not going to decide that tomorrow I want to move products to China and quickly you get to China and you get those markets. There's a relationship that needs to be built. There are supply chains that needs to be there. And in China today, although the message that is coming out from the ambassador in South Africa is very encouraging, it's something that we want to see. But let's be clear, China still have relatively higher tariffs on South African agricultural products. And there's what we call phytosanitary barriers that are there, which means the biological barriers that are not related to tariffs that China needs to resolve alongside with us. An example of this, think about the wine industry. If you are producing wine in South Africa and you are competing with our friends in Australia or Chile or elsewhere in the world, the Australians access China at a 0% tariffs when it comes to their wine. On our side, we are facing at lowest rate about 14% tariffs in China. So the affordability or the competitiveness of our product in entering the Chinese market remains a challenge. And I'm just making that as an example. But if you think about the range of products that we produce, we have over 36 commodities that we produce in agriculture at a commercial level. So accessing the Chinese market, we need to deal with some of those barriers. But I think the important thing is that in Pretoria, the conversation is starting. It's about now, how does then the DTIC, DERCO, and the Department of Agriculture continue to engage with China to resolve those barriers. But I don't want to badmouth China here. I mean, China has been excellent to us. I mean, I come from the Eastern Cape, so we are big on wool. No one produces great wool than us in the Eastern Cape. If you think about our wool industry, 70% of our exports, and I'm not talking about Eastern Cape now, South Africa, 70% of our wool exports go to China. So China is an important market. So they've not all been restrictive in our products. There's just certain things that they need to resolve, which we are having a conversation about. So diversification entails that. And it's the same conversation you can have about the Middle East and the other region. So we must continuously have that. But as that conversation is happening, it's not a replacement, it's a diversification. You need to retain what you have in the US, maintain relationship in other parts of the world, while at the same time moving to other markets. So that's an important thing. And that, by the way, links with the visit of Deputy President Paul Mashatile to France last week. We call this Mr. Mashatile in Paris, but he was literally in France. Why is it important for the agricultural sector that he's there? It's important because his theme of the visit was almost like in two forms. He said, look, we are going there as South Africa for investment promotion. That's one. And the second aspect was about strengthening relations and trade. And I think that we sometimes take Europe for granted because we have this smooth relationship that is ongoing. And it's the same thing, by the way, with the UK. But I do think that it's important that we continuously engage with these markets that we are trading with, even the rest of the African continent, which take almost half of our products when we're thinking about the exports. So the Deputy President being there for agriculture is important in a sense that it increases our visibility in Europe, because Europe is a market that is important on our side. So it's about maintaining that relationship politically and on a business side. And he was accompanied, by the way, by many business leaders. He didn't just jet off and get to France by himself. So it was really the economic one of that. And you can read that in a number of press things that South Africa has published on that. But I think this conversation mustn't end there, because certainly in the White House, there's a lot of things that were said about the South African agricultural sector. I responded by writing numerous posts and pieces and blogs about this, and many South Africans have gone on to clarify what the heck is going on in the country. But I think, folks, the reality is that, and this is based on data, we are in an agricultural sector that has done well over time. If you think about this sector from 1994 up until to today, it has more than doubled in value and in volume terms. And there are two catalysts that are behind that progress of this sector. The first catalyst at a production level is just a general increase in productivity and productivity across all of the subsectors. What is behind the increase in productivity is better seed cultivars, better genetics, better inputs that farmers are using, and technology, machinery, or otherwise to increase their efficiencies. How do those come about? They pay for that. And they pay for that, getting some from the private sector, and of course the government assisting in ensuring that they are registering those. To get a sense of how much or how committed the South African farmers are to agriculture in South Africa, do you know that the farm debt in South Africa, as we speak now, is at about 220 billion rands. By the way, this is not because the farmers are not paying their debt, the interest is rising. No. They are getting that money from the banks, and the debt is increasing at about 9% or so on average annually. But that money is for improving efficiencies, building better pack houses, making sure that there's latest machinery in the farms so that we can produce the high quality products that South Africa supplies to the world. We didn't get to be the only African country in the top 40 global agricultural exporters by luck. No. It's the best, the bit of luck, it's the grace of God, but it's also the hard work and the investment of the farmers that I think they have put on, which you see in the spending and the activities that have been happening in the sector. That's the one catalyst. But also, no one can borrow money and put that much money in a sector if it's under siege, very bad things are happening. No, you put that money if you know that you can get it back and get it back with the better returns. So there are no horrible things happening in this sector. People are investing and the sector is doing well and it's delivering, which is what you see through the products that we are sending to the world. We couldn't get exports of nearly 14 billion US dollars in a sector that is under siege. That just doesn't happen. The second aspect is the opening up of the export markets, which is a second catalyst. That global demand has been one of the most important catalysts in seeing the South African agricultural exports growing across the world, and which is why now we are ranked at 32 in the world in terms of how much exports that we put in the world. That ranking, by the way, is an achievement that all South Africans can be proud of. You know, we are a big country that when you look at it on the map, it's 122 million hectares. But the area that you can farm arably is only 15% of the South African landscape. The rest is the mountain, hills, buildings, and as well as a bit of a livestock. So we're doing well with what we have as a country. So that context is important because the message that came out of the White House was as an attempt to paint this sector as if it's under siege and things are not going well. And I think it's important to put that on the table. And you may think that because of this investment in machinery, we are now seeing jobs out of the sector, nothing good is happening for labor, but we are actually employing more people as agriculture collectively now compared to 1994. There's close to 1 million people at a primary level and another 350,000 people or so at a value chain part of the agricultural sector. So this sector is delivering and doing great things. And there's a lot more, by the way, that will be done in future. But that's something we can talk about in coming segments as to where the potential, where the land for expansion, and what must happen with regards to the inclusivity agenda of South African agriculture. Because inclusivity is something that we still have to drive. We are lacking on that, but I think we are not lacking the ideas as to how to do that. And those ideas, we can unpack them on the master plan and the various the plans that have been put in place to saying how do you unlock that. That's how the picture of the South African agricultural sector looks like. And I think in this first segment, it's important that we talk about those things because there's been those misconceptions that are there. But you know what? We cannot end this conversation. There will be a lot more to come in the next segments. Do try to subscribe in all of our segments. We are on YouTube and all socials where we are putting this. It's an AgriView with Wandile Sihlobo. I hope you continue to support and watch it. Thanks for watching.